Welcome to the Page Turnerz podcast, where book lovers unite to celebrate the enchanting world of fiction. With your host, Paul A. Brooks. In each episode, we'll dive into the captivating realms of storytelling, exploring the pages that transport us to magical places and introduce us to unforgettable characters. In each episode, we'll embark on a creative expedition through the minds of seasoned and emerging writers to unravel the mysteries and unveil the passion that fuels their stories. Join us on this odyssey through the pages and pixels of imagination, where words become worlds and stories illuminate our lives. So, pour yourself a coffee and immerse yourself in discussions about writing, gripping plots, heroes and villains, and the sheer joy of escaping into a well-crafted story.
In today's podcast, I had the pleasure of speaking to Danny Tse, author of Spiral, The Descension of Charis Cross. This is his debut novel and it has received rave reviews. Now, you're thrown into the action right from the very beginning, with one reviewer calling it a non-stop thrill ride. So if you're a fan of The Walking Dead and Stephen King, then Spiral is for you. This is author Danny Tse. Hi, Danny, and welcome to the podcast. Thanks very much for coming today. It's really nice to have you on a Sunday. Welcome.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me and having me here.
Oh, it's great. It's great to meet you. I mean, we've been talking on threads and backwards and forwards, etc. So it's nice to actually get you in front of the camera and so we can talk about your book. So Spiral, The Descension of Charis Cross. So, I mean, I've read a lot of it and it's got some rave reviews. So we're going to talk about that as we go through. I've got part of it on this screen and it will be on my Kindle a little bit later on, as I said earlier on off camera. So we'll have it. It'll be on there because I've read some of it and I've got some questions which I don't expect you to answer really, because as a reader, I'm like, right, where's that going? Oh, I see. So we'll talk about that. But what I'd like to do is to kind of start off really and talk about you as your writer and your as a writer in your writing process, and kind of where Spiral came from really. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll get you to talk about the book itself. And as I say, I'll chip in with some questions as we're going through as well, because it's really good. As I say, it's had some rave reviews, and deservedly so, I must say. So we'll talk about that. So you work full-time though, don't you? 9 to 5?
I do have a 9-to-5 job, and it's one of those situations where I'm sure a lot of writers feel that even though you're at your 9 to 5, you're just looking for excuses to think about your story, think about the characters, whether it's a coffee break or you're standing in line to get your lunch, or you're in a meeting and someone's talking to you, but you're thinking about your characters.
Yeah.
You can't help it. But yes, I do have a 9 to 5, and it's been sort of like a balancing act to do both.
Yeah, so I mean, I was going to ask you, how and when did you write? Did you find, was it kind of like early mornings or after work or during lunch or something? Because for me, I'm kind of an early bird, so I tend to write early in the morning. How does it work for you?
I wish I can wake up early enough to write, but I'm not an early bird. I think I probably, because of remote working, I can just wake up probably about 40 minutes to an hour before the workday starts. And that I probably need that 40 to an hour to just wake up.
Yeah.
So I wish I could. No, believe it or not, all of my writing is done at night. When the family's asleep, when the neighborhood has settled into bed and it's just quiet. And my wife is going to kill me, but how I write is I don't even have a desk set up. I'm in bed. She's sleeping, and I just have my laptop with me, and I would start writing at about 10:30, and I'll go as far as I can. And sometimes if I'm in a good zone, I might go until 1 or 2:30 in the morning.
Wow.
Or sometimes I'm just staring at the same paragraph for an hour, and I just tell myself something's not clicking, and I would just say I did as best as I can for that hour. Or as my wife would say, I've said hi to my story, and I said that's as best as I could. So I really just do most of it at night as long as I can. And of course, then comes the next morning where I have to wake up and try to, wake off that late night. But it's been mostly at night, yeah.
That's amazing. So, I mean, it's horror that you're writing anyway. So I suppose the night is the time to write it.
Oh, can I? Yeah, it's really funny because we live in an old home built in the early 1920s. So it's got some, old bones and muscles. So sometimes when I'm sitting there and I'm writing, if it's a real windy day, the house is creaking, the house is moving, and all of a sudden I would hear the stairwell creak, or I would hear this weird knocking in the attic, and it does sort of subliminally add to that vibe. And I'm just like, what's that sound? Can I use that?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I felt the little palpitations because I thought, wait, is someone outside? Okay, maybe I'll log that and say there's someone talking outside, but it shouldn't be talking at 3 in the morning. But I would log that moment and go, maybe I can hold that memory and use it later on when I'm trying to describe my character's feelings. So you're right, though. It definitely adds to it.
Yeah, so you've got built-in inspiration, really.
A little bit,
The
yeah.
building's writing it for you, which is great.
Unexpected, yeah.
So, I mean, as you're writing in bed, I don't know how you do that, but I've tried that. But I've actually even tried to write on vacation, taking my laptop with me, but I just can't. I'm not. I need to be. This is my kind of writing room, so I write here. So when you're writing at night and in bed, are you writing to a plot that you've created, or are you a bit like me, very kind of organic, a pantser? I'm kind of seat of the pants writing.
It's funny. I just recently, and I just joined Threads, very recently. I think just a couple of months, and that was when I learned the term
Yeah,
pantser. I
yeah,
never learned the term, and I have to credit John, someone who's also been on the podcast,
yeah.
John
Like, yeah,
Schleicher. Yeah,
yeah,
wonderful gentleman. Big shout out to
absolutely.
him.
Yeah.
But I just recently learned that term, and I didn't know what it was, and then I looked it up. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess I qualify as a pantser. Being this is my first novel, I really didn't know how to approach it. And,
Mhm.
there's a lot of folks that told me, pick up these dozen books about what to write, how to
Mhm.
write,
Mhm.
grammar and structure, how to tell a great story. And I started to read a lot of those books, and I got very intimidated. I'll
Yeah,
be honest. I started to get very overwhelmed by all
yeah.
the rules and structures and plot lines and spreadsheets and character spreadsheets and how to outline. And I just told myself, uh, and I'm sure that works for a lot of folks if they're very organized thinking, but I think for myself, it just felt too controlled. And I told myself, you know what? Since this is my first time writing, I'm gonna play that rookie card, and I'm just gonna go into it and just admit that I'm going to make a lot of mistakes. I'm going to probably break a lot of traditional rules, but let's just go and see what happens. And I guess that's sort of like you said, organic, free-flowing thought process,
Mm.
creative process makes me a pantser, I suppose. And I will wear that badge of honor anywhere I can.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with you. So, did you find that when you were writing that you would start a scene and all of a sudden it would go off on a tangent and an idea would pop into your mind? You think, oh no, it's going that way. Did it kind of work like that for you as well?
Yeah, probably more times than I can count. I would write a scene really thinking, what do I want to express here? Or what does this mean? What does this scene mean to my character? And what do I want the reader to enjoy from it?
Mm.
Because whether it's 5 pages or 10 pages, I always want to make sure that at the end of the chapter, the reader leaves remembering something or
Yeah.
leaves knowing something.
Mm.
And so for me, I took chapters as an opportunity to set a certain state or scene, as you said, but I always want to say, what is it that I want them to leave remembering, or what is
Yeah.
that emotional impact? Because
Yeah.
they could end a chapter at the end, or they can end the chapter in the middle, and for whatever reasons. Time to go to bed, time to go to work. I need to make dinner, or I need to go. A delivery person just dropped off the package, and I always want to go. What do I want them to get out of this? And that sort of starts the scene, but that's just the begin. That's like the tip of the iceberg. What do I want this to be about? And then as I'm writing it, it takes on a life of its own. Like, oh, I didn't expect my character to maybe react a certain way,
Yeah.
or my character is not my character by itself is not doing enough. Maybe I need to bring in an event, or maybe I have to bring in a character, another character, or maybe I need to think about how my character is reacting to what's happening around her. And so you start putting yourself in the shoes of your reader and say, is what's happening supporting what I want them to feel out of it?
Yeah.
So it's weird. It's almost like you're playing chess with yourself. You know what you want to do, but you have to act like you don't, because you want to keep yourself on the tip of your toes and say, would I react this way if I read this? Would I get that emotional response if I read this?
Yeah.
And then that's like, to your point, you just organically let that happen. You have a good starting point, but you kind of let it take on a life of its own. And
Yeah.
it's been wild.
That's really interesting because you were saying earlier on about when you first started, and I think most of us writers kind of start the same way. Is we have a story in mind, and you think, right, okay, so how am I going to get this story down? How am I going to let the world be able to share in this story? So, like you, I watched videos, read books, I've got a load of them behind me on how to write and structure the story. It was about character arcs and story arcs and all of that kind of stuff. And it kind of does kind of get a little bit overwhelming. And I take your point about thinking, once you've written a scene or a chapter or something like that, what do I want my reader to take away from it? So I came up with this formula. This is the first time I've said this actually. I have what I call an ACE formula, ACE. All of my scenes and chapters, they'll either start with action, a conversation, or having an emotion in it. So,
Mm.
and often a combination of all three. But as long as there's one in those, then the reader, for me, is taking something away. You're giving them something, adding to the show that's going on in their minds, and taking away from that. So that's really interesting that you said that. And that's the first time I've actually I've
I
said that
love
out
that.
loud.
I
And
love
like
that.
you, I'm very much a pantser. Although once I've written the draft, I do have a scene tracker, which is kind of like a spreadsheet. So when I reread it, and I'll write and log what each scene was, who was in it, what the scene was about, that emotion, what did I want the reader, what was the turning point in there, if you like. And I must give a shout out to StoryGrid for it, because it's kind of taken from there. It's really good. So it allows you, it identifies any plot holes, it shows continuity, or if there's anything that's lacking in there. So it's really good in that respect. So that's kind of what I do, really. So as a pantser, it's a great way to sort of rein in the journey a little bit, really, if you like. I suppose it does make it a little bit formulaic and makes it a little bit sort of on the plotter end, if you like, but that's in the rewrite more than anything else.
Yeah. And,
Um,
and to
so
your
do
point,
you,
though,
when you are writing, do you have the kind of, in terms of a writing routine, do you write a certain number of words, a certain number of pages? Do you have a writing goal for that writing session in mind?
no, honestly, I don't. As I sort of alluded to, I've adopted this phrase from my wife, which is say hi, and
Yeah,
she just say hi to your story. And
yeah,
try to make it a habit to at least say hi once a day.
yeah,
And it's hard for me to write during the day because I have so many thoughts. My brain is going at a million miles an hour. I have too many things going in my head. So nighttime is where I can really put all that aside. I tell myself all the worries of the world will be there in the morning. The nighttime is where it's just me. And I just go in there saying, I'm going to say hi to my story.
yeah,
It might be a short conversation. It might be a long conversation. Uh, whether that translates into 5 words or whether that translates into 5 paragraphs or a whole chapter. I don't know. And it really just comes down to what is the moment like for me.
right.
Uh, I to your point about having that, I love your structure of ACE. I think that is wonderful, and I'm going to build that in my head. Um, and you're right. Once I got the first draft done, there was a moment where I had to be a little bit more structured in my thinking. Um, one of the earliest moments I recall was My wife read the book. She's been my greatest advocate for reading it. She's read it 4 times. She's been very critical about it. And she said, I think you need to plot out when the time frame for this, because you're describing the ambiance a lot, like the light is seeping through the curtains, or the evening sky is settling, painting the room an amber orange. I'm like, okay, what's wrong with that? And she goes, but the timeline's a little off. Like, how much time has passed? Is it the same day? Is
Yeah,
this scene happening in the morning?
yeah,
Is the next scene happening at night? What's happening in between? So I had to go through and actually kind of do a little bit and go, day one, which chapters are day one? Which chapters are in the morning of day one? Which
yeah.
chapters are in so and I realized until I did that, I was inconsistent. Like I all of a sudden I had a time jump and I didn't even realize that. So it does help once you do the first draft to kind of take a step back and go, is the scenery and the environment I'm creating consistent? And you do have to take a little, you have to adopt a little bit of the plotter to your pantser. And that's
Absolutely.
what a happy marriage really
Yeah,
is.
that's where for me, where the scene tracker,
Yeah,
so there's a story grid video out there about it,
that's
which
awesome.
is kind of where I stole it from, so to speak, to
I
use
will too.
it, because it is brilliant. It works really well, and it does. I went through exactly the same thing. Is this time frame to make sure that it kind of made sense, because as a pantser, your mind is running away. It's going 100 miles an hour, and you're desperately rattling away on the keyboard trying to keep up with what's going on in your mind.
Yeah.
And we do take jumps, and there are time jumps, and it is written. Your wife's right. It is very easy to, think in your mind that it's morning, but you're writing a scene that potentially is an evening scene, and that's where I think where that tracker that I use has been amazing for me particularly. So I'm kind of happy with that to use that. Um, so because you work full time then, and Spirals out, how long did it take you to write it?
I actually started this back in 2018,
Oh, wow. Okay.
believe it or not. And it started off as a sort of an escape. I did it as a creative outlet.
Mm,
I actually went to art school.
right.
I went to art school. I studied graphic design, and actually to the worry of my father, of my entire family are in traditional professions like accounting, healthcare, and I chose I'm going to go to art school. So you can see my father feeling a little bit nervous. But I've always needed a creative outlet
Yeah.
because my 9 to 5 is more analytical. My 9 to 5 is purely on the analytical side, and I've always wanted to have some form of that creative framework. So I tried painting, I tried furniture making, I've even tried candle making with the scents.
Yeah.
And so at one point I said, let me try creative writing because with the seasons changing, there are certain things I can't do in the winter. I can do only do in the summer and whatnot. So I started this in 2018. So for all the writers out there that think my work is taking too long, I started this in 2018. I just released it just this year. So it's a 6-year journey for me. So things just take its time. But back in 2018, I was writing short stories.
Right.
This this all started with very short stories. Some of them were 3 paragraphs, some of them were a page and a half. And it was just a form of expression. I wanted to just see how I can do this, how I can actually put words on paper that was expressional. And then, like you said, the 9 to 5 took over, and I can only do a short story maybe once every few months, or maybe I can do two in a weekend. But then the pandemic happened,
Right.
and like many people, I found myself with this golden opportunity where I didn't have to deal with a 2-hour commute. I didn't, everyone logged off their video cameras at 5 o'clock. And I said, oh, I've got ample time on my hand. I could play video games. I can go do other things. But I said, let me actually commit myself to writing. And so I went back to my short stories. I wrote a few more, and they were fun. But then I said, well, how am I going to really evolve me as a writer? How can I
Mm,
evolve myself as a storyteller?
yeah.
So I challenged myself and said, how can I take these short stories and either let them live on its own or bring them together. And so COVID gave me a chance to really sit down and have that evening, have anywhere from 1 hour to 5 hours outside of my 9 to 5 and say, let me throw myself into this. And that really was where my enthusiasm for storytelling just took off.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was going to ask, and this is probably one of the worst questions you can ask a writer. Is where did you get your idea for Spiral from? I mean, really, because it's not the sort of thing that you can go into Walmart and buy off the shelf, is it? So it's like, where did your idea for Spiral come from?
One of my best friends growing up, his brother is in film. Well, he was studying film in school. And anytime we talked about what it can be, we sort of naturally gravitated towards, how do I say it? So have you heard of the book Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies?
Yes.
Right. I don't know when it came out, but back in 2005, I would say as early 2000s, we wanted to take a lot of classic stories, and we would say, let's zombify them. Let's see what would happen. So we were the precursor to that. We never really went very far. So it's sort of like that idea of big magic, where if you don't, hold on to it, that inspiration will go somewhere else. That's the kind of book my wife reads, and she imbued me with. She's like, unless you hold on to that inspiration, it's going to go somewhere else, and someone else is going to give it the love that it wants.
Yeah.
But that idea, so we were thinking, one of the first ideas was Titanic came out, and we said, oh, this is lovely. This is a beautiful story. What if we zombified it?
Yeah.
All these like people stuck on a boat and trying to survive, or Gone with the Wind. What would happen there? Or so we were just like talking about all these, classical scenes. But what would you do if you just flipped it on its head and just completely threw a curveball in there? So that thought always stayed with me. Anytime I watched a movie, anytime I read a book, I just said, what would happen if you just threw a curveball situation and it completely changes the social dynamics of what's happening there? And I've always wondered what that would be like. So there was an opportunity where I was watching horror movies. It's one of my favorite things I watch, horror genres. And I said, what it's already got that shock value. So what else can I do? And I said, what's the curveball that I can throw into a horror genre that someone wouldn't expect? Well, it's already got the scary and the, as one reader would call it, the goriness.
Yeah.
So like, what can I do in there? I said, well, maybe the curveball I can do is, how is the person feeling in that moment? Because most times you're seeing a person react to what's happening around them. You're seeing them react to their environment. You're seeing them being put in a situation and say, how am I going to deal with this? It's a very reactive mode.
Yeah.
I wanted to think, well, what if I do the opposite of what I want to? Instead of zombifying it and putting everyone like chickens with their head cut off, what if I do the other way? And I said, what if I get deep into a person's psyche? How is, rather than just a physical reaction to what's going on, what's the emotional toll? What are they thinking? And how does that moment either enhance their moral values, or maybe in some degree, they have to sacrifice what makes them of high moral character.
Yeah.
They have to sacrifice that for the sake of survival.
Yeah.
And that's where I sort of like, maybe there's something worth exploring there, that human element. Because we all know, if we woke up one day and we're in whether it's a viral infection, a viral apocalyptic, or zombies or whatever, we're going to have that fight or flight moment. Absolutely. We all know that. We all know that. Yeah. But then there's going to be moments of quietness, right? You're either hiding in a room or you're alone at night. You're going to have those moments where you're just alone with your thoughts.
Yeah.
And that could be dangerous in and of itself, because when you're alone with your thoughts, you don't know if that's necessarily something that's going to make you stronger or something that's going to make you weaker. It all depends on where you are as a person and how has the situation chipped at that shell that you're trying to create. And
Yeah.
that was sort of like, that was the inspiration for this.
Well, let's talk specifically then about Spiral, the Descension of Charis Cross, because it's really interesting what you've just said in terms of how you've written the book. I mean, I love the start of it, where she's eating a sandwich in the park. You know, I don't want to give the story away too much, but then you got that teenage boy being chased by a grandma. You know, and she's just chomping away on her sandwich, just viewing this strange weirdness that's going on. Um, you know, and I won't spoil it. So you know, because you know, people should read it. It's kind of action all the way through. I mean, I mean, what happens to the young man, or rather, when Charis does eventually intervene? Interesting. And then what happens to him immediately afterwards? I went, oh, okay. Wow, I wasn't kind of expecting that. And she's chomping away on the sandwich, thinking, should I have got involved in this? Oh, I don't know. So, you know, and then there's you know, she's in the elevator with Nick, and then she's in the room with Rod. So anyway, you know, people have got to go and read it. I suppose, I mean, I'll get you to talk about this, and again, I'm going to ask this question now, and you don't have to answer it. But when I was reading through, I mean, she's a strong female protagonist, I think. When you're reading about Charis, but is there something more to her? I mean, I've only read the first 5, 6 chapters, so is there something more to her than meets the eye? I mean, you don't have to answer that fully, but I'm kind of thinking, you know, as a reader, you know, she kind of goes into herself, it seems, and she asks questions of herself, her own psyche, her own mind, and of her own state of mind. So I'm wondering whether or not there's more to her than meets the eye. So you don't have to answer that. That's just that's kind of what I'm looking forward to finding out as a reader. So let me hand it over to you. Talk to us about Spiral, the Descension of Charis Cross. Where did it come from? You know, her herself. Is she based on anybody? Where did her name come from? All of that. I'll let you carry on. So go on. Over to you.
Well, first, I love the fact that you started off by saying you have all these questions about who she is, how does she end up where the chapter 1 started?
Yeah.
And is that a circumstance of what happened, or is that always how she's been? And
yes, sorry to interrupt, but I just love the way that you had in terms of time frames. You were talking earlier on, and because I've done something similar in the Book of Night. I don't know how to explain it, but you're kind of in one time.
Yep.
That links to the next time it jumps. It's great. It's really good. It keeps you going. Oh, yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, right. I'm sorry. Carry on.
No. And I love that you have those questions. And it's one thing that I've had the benefit of. So one of the things I had to do as a starting writer is I tried to get as much mentorship as I can. So I joined a writing group who I sent an acknowledgement to, and I had a really wonderful mentor who guided me, and they said, when you're telling a story, you also want to make sure that there's a certain aspect of your character that people understand.
Yeah.
But there's also an aspect of your character that you want your readers to feel like they're invested in, and how they invest in your character has to be something that's real, has to be something that's relatable. And so I told myself, okay, what is it about Charis that is relatable, but it's something that people would feel, would I have acted or been the same if I was in her shoes? And that goes back to the point we made, like the most natural and most relevant and most the aspect that resonates the most is fight or flight. If you're in a situation where the world's falling apart, you're going to want to survive.
Yeah.
And you're going to want to form a hard shell and say, I need to protect me and the ones I love. But I think where I had to really think about is that instinctual? And is that something that you can maintain always? Because it takes a lot on anybody to always fend off.
Yeah.
Right. Because then you become a person of one. And we all know as human beings, we're not genetically created to be alone. We need people. We
Others,
need
yeah,
camaraderie. We need society. We need people.
yeah,
If and that's the thing that I realize is, writing this in the pandemic, you're in your home, you're by yourself, or you're with your immediate loved ones if you have the benefit of living with your close family. But there's always a part of you that wants to reach out. There's a part of you that wants to connect with somebody, the cabin fever feeling. So it's that sense of like, well, how do you fight that? Because while you want to survive, that's your instinct. That's what people understand. In an apocalypse, it's all about me.
mm,
But for a while that's going to take a toll, and how that changes you psychologically. It might not change you genetically. You'll still be who you are, your muscles, your bones, and your eye color.
yeah,
But how does that change you psychologically, for the worse or for the better? And that was what that was how I sort of look at Charis and say, when you start off with chapter 1, you're already getting a sense of who she was. She's pretty strong. She's pretty strong-willed. She's pretty. She sits down at the bench and says, "I'm just here to enjoy a moment to myself while something's happening there." But
she
you
is
have
the
to
most chilled person I know. My goodness. And even when she's in the lift with Nick, I'm thinking she's just kind of sitting there, and he's going crazy. Yeah. Anyway, sorry.
and no, and I love those moments where it kind of makes you say, well, it kind of makes you say, like, how does she become this way?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I wish I had, 1,000 pages to get into how she was. And what you'll find is there are moments where you'll be able to understand how she grew up, essentially. But then you realize, okay, that makes her a person today. But how does that change her demeanor just sitting there on a park bench? Because,
Mm,
to be in an elevator, to be kind of cool-headed, to be kind of like, okay, I know what I need to do in this situation. It's another to turn a blind eye to
yeah,
someone who needs
yeah,
help. So how does one take a demeanor in chapter 1 and take a demeanor in chapter 2 and say, where's that gap? How
yeah,
does one go from point A? And I'm hoping that readers, as you explore further in the book, you'll see that the values that she was raised to have, well, how much of that can she really hold on to? How much of that has to change because of what's happening?
yeah,
That was really the catalyst for her character, and really what I for all those other characters that come in, whether it's the gentleman Nick in the elevator, whether it's the events that happen, every character that I had to think about is they have to have a reason for this character arc.
yeah,
Um, I wanted to make, and this, I took the easy way out, and I'll be honest, I took the easy way out. There are a lot of wonderful authors out there that are creating beautiful worlds. They are creating beautiful societies. I took the easy way out and I said, I'm going to focus in the building.
yeah,
I'm going to focus in a very controlled environment where you're just in a New York City apartment building. And part of that was I grew up in New York City. I grew up living in a city, and that was always my world. You ended up knowing your neighbors, you knew who you lived next to, and these are folks that you see every day, whether you're waiting for an elevator to go to work, or you're getting takeout and someone's, oh, you're having pizza again? Yeah, it's pizza night. That's cool. And so I thought it's a controlled enough environment that I can be selective in terms of who she interacts with,
mm,
because ultimately those characters have to influence who she who she becomes
yeah.
in the end.
But then,
And
you're also, I think, because you're writing, you're setting the scenes in familiar environments. It allows, I think, the your creativity to flow a little bit more when you're not having to construct something artificial
yeah.
in terms of the scene and where they are. It just allows the characters to become stronger, I think, because you're in your comfort zone, so to speak,
Yes.
when you're writing in the scenes, which
Yeah.
is absolutely fine. So Charis, and Charis, first of all, is she based on anybody that you know, or what was her character inspiration? Where does she come from?
my character
This is where you
inspiration.
lose friends. You know that, don't you?
Yeah. Oh, Charis was born actually from my wife. Because, and here's the thing, I'm not even joking. When I would sit there and watch a horror film, or I would sit there and read and tell her about the book I'm reading, her natural reaction would be like, she would say, "Oh, I'll be dead in 5 minutes." And I said, "I'm not sure." I think my wife is being humble. I said, "I think given the dire situation, you would find it deep down this need to survive. And I think you're not giving yourself enough credit. I think
Mm,
all of us, whether you're an extrovert, whether you're an introvert, whether you're a proactive person or you're not, I do believe deep down everyone has this courage and this courage that will come out when the time is right." And I told her, and I told my wife, "You say you're gonna die in 5 minutes, and she always says, nope, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go." And I said, "No, I think you will figure out a way to survive." And I basically wrote this character as sort of what I think she could be, because I do see a lot of strength in my wife. I see a lot of ability to survive, even though she says, "No, I'm gone." I said, "No, I really think you would." And I think I started off writing Charis as how I viewed my wife, like someone who can survive.
yeah.
And and then as I started to talk to more folks, and I really spoke to a lot of people, and I spoke to folks of very different backgrounds. I spoke to folks of different life experiences. And I really spoke to a lot of women because Charis is a female character. And
Yeah.
I spoke to a lot of women saying, how would you handle the situation? Or if you woke up one day and you had to face this problem, what are the first few thoughts that go in your mind? And some of them could be worry, some of them could be fear, some of them could be anxiety. Some folks are very like direct. Well, I would just do X, Y, and Z and I'll be done. And it really allowed me to, what started off as just as a psychological evaluation of my wife, it really, now talking to a lot of people, I got this really well-rounded understanding of how many different folks have a very different reaction
Yeah.
or different response, even a response rate to what's happening. And so the character really evolved after a lot of just talking to many folks.
Yeah.
um yeah, it's been just a wonderful journey in just talking to folks and say, what would you do?
So, and other than talking to people about it, what are you reading anything at the moment that may have influence is perhaps not quite the right word, but kind of given you a direction perhaps for Charis to go in? Is it, do you read horror yourself?
Yeah, I read horror as a child,
Right.
and I remember reading I don't remember, I was just talking to someone about it actually. I was reading a book and it scared me so much that I couldn't read it anymore. And I could I was just talking to somebody about it, and then the title was right there, and now I can't, it's slipping me. But I remember reading, talking about the branches were touching the window and almost like fingernails on a
Wow.
chalkboard, and
Yeah.
the moaning of, and like I said, writing at night, the moaning of the floorboards that creaked at night. And I remember as a kid, it scared the heck out of me,
Yeah.
and I couldn't finish it. Um, but I haven't really, other than some Stephen King's here and there, like you said, a lot of people recommended it. I haven't read a lot of horror books, and I think I made that choice deliberately when I started this adventure, this journey, because I wanted to remove myself a bit from work that's been done, because I
Yeah.
think the natural part of me
Yeah.
that would almost feel like I'm going to emulate them. Like, is this what I'm supposed to write? Is this the expectation? Other folks that have read great horror stories, is this my baseline? Do I need to meet this level?
Mm.
And oh, on the worst thing, what if I read something so wonderful and then when I start to write it, oh my goodness, unknowingly I'm plagiarizing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
like, I
Yeah.
just I just needed to remove myself from that. But what I did read, interesting enough, is I read books in other genres.
Okay.
I didn't read a lot of horror, so I read a lot of books in other genres. So my wife loves reading self-helps. She loves reading, and I don't want to say that the genres because I don't want to mess up, but stories about life. Read books about loss. There was a really sad book I read of. It's called something and the Elephant. It's a gentleman who has a dog, and the dog has cancer, um and just you go through this experience where this gentleman is talking about his love for his dog and just watching his and the moments leading up to the day where the dog has to go. So I was reading a book about the person growing up in the city alone, and these are all outside of horror. But that actually helped me because, as I said, I really wanted to get into the head of Charis. I really want to know what she's experiencing. And early alpha readers, I think that's the word, alpha readers, folks that you're giving your first draft to, said, Danny, you're focusing a lot on the action. You're focusing a lot on her reacting, but you really need to get into, tell us a little bit about her thinking.
Yeah.
How is she internalizing this? How is all this affecting her psychologically? Is she scared? Is she okay? Is she questioning a lot of things? Are things starting to take a toll? And so I think being able to read books in other genres, especially the ones that talk a little bit about loss, a lot of about hope, a little bit about, I might be in a bad situation, but I know there's something greater out there, and I just had to continue to believe that that the light is at the end of the tunnel.
Mm.
They just gave me a chance to say, how can I apply this, not just to Charis, but also how I can imbue this. Is that the right word? Imbue, like infuse? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can I infuse this in or represent this in characters that she will interact with? So, when she's feeling like she's just at the lowest point, is that the right time to bring in a character that lifts her spirits up? Or if Karis is feeling like, I can do this, I think I can do it, is there an event or a person that might just take a little bit of a sledgehammer at that
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
knock her back a few steps?
Yeah.
So reading books in my genre, like I said, I just wanted to not influence me too much, but I did read other books to kind of inspire that theme. I feel that theme I wanted to capture.
That's great, but because equally as well, I was talking to my wife earlier on actually before we came on today about reading books in other genres as
Yeah.
well, because I think you're right. I think it allows you to absorb some of the emotion from, if you're reading romance, for example, to absorb some of that emotion and then transfer it into your genre as well. No, I think that's great. That's a great answer. I think you're absolutely right with that. So, I mean, you don't read, and I think, again, the fact that you don't read much horror allows you a unique voice,
Yeah.
something that you're not then sort of comparing yourself to, or as you call it, plagiarizing the idea. You're not really doing that, but you know what I'm saying. You kind of, you're not.
Influenced. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not writing something based on something else someone else's and else is writing as well. So are you are you planning on anything else beyond? Is there going to be another book in is it going to be a series? What sort of your plans for the future?
Yeah, it's funny you said that. A lot of folks that have read the book have expressed, and I'm so blown away and so unbelievably grateful that folks, the people that have read the book have said, we want another one.
Mm-hmm.
And I would go back and go, really?
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah,
never had
yeah.
a plan. I never had a plan for another one because honestly, I wanted to see how this played out. I didn't think it would go any further, but a lot of people have written to say, well, I've got questions. What about this? What happens there? What's going to happen to Karis?
Yeah.
What's going and not to spoil anything, but they'll say, we're still waiting to know about this other thing.
Yeah.
And I said, wow, the reception has been so wonderful that I said, maybe I should consider it. It's not to say that you're going to finish the book and go, I'm not, what is this? There's the cliffhanger. You'll get conclusions, but there is a sense of like you said, you read chapter 1, And the chapter one is sort of, you then do a time jump back.
Yeah.
But chapter one is giving you a peek into, her sort of behavior. Is that going to continue? Because given the story, how is that sustainable?
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
if she keeps going along that way, that's going to be terrible. But to your point, I do have another project going on right now.
Good.
It is completely different. I have actually started a children's book.
Okay. Wow.
It's completely different. I as a way of challenging myself, I said, what is another story I can write? And I said, let me try a children's book. And because, with a story like Spiral, I had the luxury of 300 plus pages. I had the luxury of words that I can bring together to really let the reader go deep into the person. I felt the children's book was a complete opposite end of the spectrum. You don't
Yeah.
have 300 pages.
Yeah.
You don't have all the words in the world. You have to keep your choice of words to a minimum, and yet you really want the story to tell some meaningful thing, right? And so I said, I think that's going to be a nice little challenge for me as a writer. How can how we were talking about, I want the reader to read a chapter and leave feeling something, or I want the reader to read a chapter and learn something new. If you have 30 enough of those chapters, those are great. Now I want the person to read the children's story in totality and leave with something completely new. And so I said, let me try that. Let me try a children's book. Obviously, it can't be, I'm not doing anything horrific. It's a story about, how can I say? It's a story about a plate, a dinner plate that feels like it doesn't belong. Yeah, so it's writing the story in a way that's telling a good value on who you are as an individual. But again, it's got to be, I just don't have that luxury of 300 pages. So that's my next project right now.
That's fantastic. It's again something totally different that will stretch you in another way. So wow, hats off to you for that. I mean, I'm looking at sort of writing a horror in the next one because I still would need the 300 plus pages to get it down. So that's really good. So slightly off topic and staying with Spiral really, or even with your children's book. I understand that you're learning another language. Is that right?
Yes. I'm picking up where I stopped back in high school. I was learning Spanish.
Okay.
Back in school, you have a language elective, and I chose Spanish, and it really stopped after I graduated. But there were a lot of words that just stayed with me. A lot of them, oddly enough, had to do with food. For some reason, I just learned. I guess it just stuck with me, and part of what I wanted to do was find ways to just keep my mind active.
Right.
And language is just one of the best ways to do it. You're gonna hear me sound like a broken record, but again, my wife, being my muse, my inspiration, she's learning 2 languages, which is kind of wild. And she said, try Duolingo. And this is not a paid sponsored ad, but I said, let me give it a shot. And so I told myself, I have a handful of words in Spanish that I learned. Might as well use that as a starting point. So I'm learning it. Once in a while, I will pull up a YouTube video in Spanish. If I'm flipping through the channel, I would stop. And I would just try to test myself.
The reason I ask, because you're probably wondering why I'm going, where I'm going with that, was really because have you any thoughts on translating Spiral into Spanish, into other language? And the reason I asked that again is because mine is going to be hopefully translated into Japanese. So that's why I ask. Were you on Duolingo for a reason to translate it into Spanish? because I think that's such a cool thing to do. And I think, having read sort of the first 5 chapters, I'm looking at chapter 6 now on this screen over here, of Charis's adventure. I'm thinking it would lend itself really well to another language, Spanish particularly, as that's because it would fit, it would work. I don't know, set it in Madrid as opposed to New York. I think it would work perfectly. Or Barcelona, where you've got that huge cathedral, which, oh wow, sorry, my mind would just go off on all sorts of tangents there. Oh no, that's really good. But I like the idea that you're doing something else to stretch your mind, which is great. But it would also be really good if you translated it into another language as well. That would be really cool.
Can I tell you a funny story about that?
Yeah.
So no, you're absolutely right. And if I ever get a request, someone says, can you please do a translation? I would feel it is one of my, writer's dream to say someone wants it. And I will try to get that to work. The funny story is my mother-in-law, she is a celebrated author. And so she writes stories. A lot of them are about her personal life. And so when she became my mother-in-law, I always looked up to her. I was like, wow, here is an author, here is a writer, and she's published her stories, and she really was an inspiration as well. So I'm Chinese and she's Korean. And so when I wrote the book, I said, wow, I probably should try to find a way to translate this in Korean for her.
Definitely.
And because it's one of those sad things where I wrote a book and I want her to enjoy it, but she can't because it's in English. She can probably pick up a few words, but it's not her native language. And, when you write a story like this, you are choosing adjectives or certain words that are not commonly used. And so I told myself, maybe I need to invest in translation just for the sake of my mother-in-law.
Yeah.
It is, but if I ever reach that point where to what you just said, a desire or a request or a demand to do so, put in other languages. They say you have a bucket list of life. I have a bucket list as a writer. That would be one.
That would be one of them. Absolutely.
One of them.
Yeah, that's really good. So where is Spiral available now? Where can people go and buy it?
It's on Amazon.
Okay.
I know that there are a lot of venues out there, but because I'm dipping my toe into this, it's predominantly in Amazon. You can get it on Amazon Kindle Unlimited. It's also available on paperback.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's there. Come get it.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I'll put links to your website and Instagram and all that sort of stuff in the description so people can connect with you and sort of learn more about you and ask you questions and all that sort of stuff. What I just want to say before we kind of round up for today is that one of your reviews says, get ready for a page turner, because Spiral really is a page turner. And you say in your bio that you are an aspiring writer, but I think you can scratch that. You are a writer. And the reason that I say that is because, as you said earlier on, and it's absolutely true, people want more from you now. So you are a writer. So it's been a real pleasure to speak to another writer. Yes. And I wish you all the very best of luck. And hopefully once your children's book comes out, we can connect again and we can talk about that. But for now, Danny, thank you very much for coming on the show today. And it's been a great pleasure to meet you. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. Thank you for letting me talk a bit about the writing. It's been so refreshing. It's one of those things where you write, you put it out there, you get those wonderful reviews, but there's nothing like connecting to someone to talk about it, writer to writer, writer to reader.
Yeah.
This has been so much fun. The time flew by for me. I hope it did for you.
Yeah.
But thank you, and thank you again.
My pleasure. Thanks, Danny. I'll speak to you again.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on another captivating episode of the Page Turnerz podcast. We hope you enjoyed delving into the pages with us, discovering new stories, and revisiting beloved classics. If you're as passionate about books as we are, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and leave a review. Your feedback keeps us bringing you fascinating discussions, author interviews, and book recommendations. Remember, the adventure never ends when you have a book in hand. Until next time, Keep turning those pages and let the magic of storytelling continue to inspire your imagination. Happy reading.